Good morning. Today is day 7 in the trial of former Grand Rapids police officer Christopher Schurr. There are no proceedings in court today as the jury began their deliberations yesterday afternoon. The fate of Christopher Schurr is now in the hands of 12 people who will continue their deliberations. This morning, I'm joined by Tanner and Emily. Emily and I were here yesterday, Tanner, and it went really fast in terms of what happened yesterday.
It's going to be interesting to see if we don't get a verdict today. I feel as if the jury deliberated for 4 hours yesterday. Hard telling what happened in those deliberation chambers. But it will be interesting to see if we do end up getting that verdict today and what will happen as a result of that today.
Yeah, we've been reporting this morning that they had until about 5 yesterday after getting to start those deliberations around 12:45 in the afternoon. So about 4 hours, as you just said, Tanner. They had really most of the day while court was in session to start those deliberations. Lauren, you mentioned the first part going pretty quickly. We got those closing arguments, obviously from both sides. Then the prosecution went back up for about 15 minutes for a rebuttal before the really lengthy part was really the instructions from the judge. I mean, I couldn't believe it. You saw the pile of paper in her hands as she's going through and not skipping a word. I mean, including even naming all of the witnesses, the expert witnesses anyway, who took the stand by name with their title. So just really making sure they were completely thorough in giving the jurors their instructions for the next part of this trial.
It was very interesting as we kind of rounded out the proceedings after the arguments at the very end. And of course, we had a couple of motions there. You saw another directed verdict motion from the defense side. And then we also saw a motion to, remind me exactly what it was, but it was on judicial...
For the mistrial.
Yeah, for the
right,
mistrial.
for a directed verdict and a mistrial for judiciary bias.
Bias, yeah. Very interesting that that was brought up.
Again.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, after those motions had already been denied once.
Yeah.
But again, it's those I guess, little steps you make for if you decide to do an appeal, he is convicted, to kind of show that you exhausted all the things that you could do before you got to that part. And also with the instructions, those are normal. We always see those. I just think a lot of times when you're watching court TV or you're watching Netflix, you see the 1 or 2 instructions, so you think it's just this basic thing. But she went through a lot of stuff when she was going through those instructions.
It was a big stack. Not only you mentioned the experts that she went right through. She goes, so-and-so, an expert on this, so-and-so, an expert on this, but also very circumstantial things too. You heard testimony on this. It's up for you to decide on exactly, and in fact, you should be encouraged to decide for yourself depending on what you heard. So again, they have a lot to weigh. We heard from, almost around 15 witnesses in total, or maybe a little more than that. And to me, I'm just thinking about the jury and what they have to do, what they're tasked with all the testimony that they've been hearing since last week. So you think about how much they have to wrestle with in terms of this verdict.
A lot of information. I couldn't help but wonder, how many times has the judge had to read this long list of instructions? I'm sure many, many times. Of course, this was slightly different in that it was specific to this case, but I know she's read those words many, many times before. But going back to some of those instructions, it was interesting to hear her say, you've heard a lot of information, but I will tell you what the law is that you need to follow, and this should only be based off of your decision and yours alone. Of course, they need to be unanimous in that decision, but they need to decide for themselves.
I've also thought what was interesting is she really honed in on you can only focus on the facts. And for me, that she answered my question very quickly, but in this case, we saw the jurors being able to ask the witnesses, including Schurr, questions, and she said verbatim that you cannot take testimony from questions in regards to the prosecution, defense, and even your own questions to the witnesses and their answers as facts. It can only be physical things like documents, the videos that we saw, and then the sworn in testimonies that we saw. So, for me, that makes me wonder, how does the jury kind of separate, things that they heard, that they agreed with versus actual facts, and do those two connect.
Yeah, I was taking some notes on that when she was giving those parts of the instructions, because I was really wanting to listen clearly. How will the jurors differentiate what they're supposed to listen to as fact, what they're supposed to just take in as they make their decision? I noticed a couple of things she mentioned, because she said you need to be able to separate what is evidence and what is not evidence. She mentioned witnesses, exhibits, those different, papers that the prosecution and defense would reference during the trial, even the videos, those would be exhibits, of course. Those she specified as evidence. Things she said do not qualify as evidence. The charges, just because these charges are being brought against her, that has nothing to do with evidence in the case. The lawyer statements, obviously people see them as authoritative figures in this process, but those are just their statements. That's not actually evidence. And the questions that were posed by the prosecution, the defense, jurors, the judge herself, she said even the questions that I've asked, that doesn't qualify as evidence in the case.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see, how the jurors take all that information and put it together and say, okay, this is the decision we have to make. And also the same unanimous decision altogether. Right. I think that's also the complicated thing, is that you're going to have people that think one way and one person think another way, and someone in the middle ground, and you all have to come together and say, this is the decision.
It's also interesting to see this process play out, right? So this is really a rare time that we get to kind of see the entire proceedings as a whole, watching it on that 30-minute delay, and then to just see that process play out and see the transparency of how court has happened over the last week or so. Has just been a very interesting process to watch. And you really do have to sit there and think about, okay, this jury has a tough job here.
Yeah.
Because not only are they considering that second-degree murder charge, now they have to have another element here, the voluntary manslaughter charge that could also be considered here. So again, 4 factors that the jury could present to us when they do reach the verdict.
Yeah, I imagine that is what maybe takes so much time. I mean, they've already had several hours, maybe some of them already had, a verdict in mind individually, but that process of all getting on the same page, if they can, and weighing just all of the information that they've had to go over in the last several days, I imagine that's what it is that's taking some time here.
And when they go through that process, the way it follows is that they have to first start with the second-degree murder charge. They all have to agree if they believe that he's convicted or not.
Right.
Before they can move on to the manslaughter charge, they all have to be on the same page. Once they're on the same page for that one, if they decide, okay, no, he's innocent of that charge, then they go to the manslaughter charge, and all have to be on the same page for that as well. And then obviously there's always the outcome of a hung jury. Now, we spoke with experts who said that judges really push these jurors to actually make a decision. Obviously not forcing them to make a decision, but they could come back today and say, we're really stuck, we really don't know what to do. And one of our experts, Tanya, said that usually a judge will go back to them and say, hey, I know this is a very complicated situation, a lot of things that you have to put into play, but this is your duty as a civilian in our area. You decided to join this jury or accepted being a part of this jury. Please take this very responsibly and go back and continue to deliberate. They're really gonna try their hardest to get the jury to come up with a decision before they actually get to the hung jury option.
Yeah.
And then during her instructions as well, she said in good conscience, right? So you have to kind of think about the weight. I would imagine she's using that verbiage to make the jury realize that there is a lot resting on your shoulders, so do your best to try and find a verdict here.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the climate, outside of the courthouse, if opinions are as strong inside that jury room, I can only imagine how difficult it'll be for them to come to one decision, because if you've got one person on one side and another on the other side, somehow trying to get one person to change his or her mind, I bet would be quite the job to do in that room.
And something interesting and we actually have a live look outside of the courthouse right now. You can see demonstrators obviously on both sides standing outside. I don't know what you guys are seeing. There we go. We got a little bit of a bigger picture, but a pretty decent size out there.
Yeah, I see some Black Lives Matter posters in the crowd. Also seeing that thin blue line flag, which that would lead me to believe those are Christopher Schurr supporters in this case. But of course, this is what we've seen over the course of the 7 days of this trial. Not every day we've seen this big of a response with protesters or demonstrators, we should call them. But again, this looks like, you know, one of the larger demonstrator groups that we've seen over the last week.
Definitely, and you can see that they're almost kind of amongst each other. I'm sure there's some words being exchanged, but for the most part, when we've seen these demonstrators outside, they've been pretty peaceful. We've been able to talk to them. They have talked to us and expressed how they feel. You know, we have, especially in the afternoon, heard some of them chanting or, you know, speaking very loudly. But again, for the most part, it's been very peaceful when it comes to these demonstrators.
I want to go back to what you noticed on day one, that one lady who showed up that just wanted to pray for this entire situation and pray for both sides and hoping for healing to come out of this entire process too.
Yeah, that was day one of the trial. So last Monday morning, we started to see people show up as early as 5 a.m. We mentioned before that doors open to the courthouse at 6:30 in the morning for those wanting to get a seat. This particular woman that you mentioned, Tanner, she showed up to the courthouse around 6 a.m. Monday morning, day one of the trial. She said she didn't think anyone would be out there. Of course, there were other people out there. She thought she was early enough to beat the crowd. But she said her plan was to get there and just pray for peace. I mean, I think we can all testify to the fact that this has certainly created some division, I think, in opinions and in the way certain people approach this debate. But I think that she said, regardless of the outcome, once this court case is over, we're all still going to be here. We're all still going to be here, part of this community. She wanted to pray for peace and healing, regardless of the outcome of this case.
It's something that we're seeing here. Of course, I see justice for Patrick, that being Patrick Lyoya, the person killed in this case. Black Lives Matter sign right there. You also see some Christopher Schurr demonstrators as well. Just really one of the larger showings we've seen over the last 7 days in this trial. I wonder if we could, is there audio? Are we able to hear if they're saying anything? Okay, we're hearing that there are some expletives. Okay, yeah, it does sound like they are chanting. I can't tell which side that is, but.
And also something I think people probably have seen is we have seen JRPD police cars drive by. The police station is nearby
Right
for
there.
those
Yep.
who are curious. So we can't say whether or not they're circling to make sure that this demonstration stays peacefully or if they're just going back to work. But that police station is nearby. So that may be why we're seeing some GRPD officers drive by the courthouse.
Yeah, and it almost seems that there has been more interest from people to be outside of the courthouse. We haven't really seen when we would see those lines form of people wanting to get inside the courthouse, you know, at least at 6:30 a.m., the time we were out there, and once we would see the doors open and allowing people in, there was never really a long line of people. Oftentimes, you know, maybe 3 or 4 people standing there before doors were opening. And many times I would see at least half of that crowd, 2 of the people carrying, you know, notepads or something to suggest that was maybe a member of the media, making sure to get their seat inside. And so it does seem that there are some people intent on getting inside the courtroom, but others that had a plan that they wanted to be part of the demonstrations outside of the courtroom as, you know, the trial was underway.
And I'm sure part of that is maybe because when you're outside, you can show more support to people driving by. You know, who knows if Schurr is able to see outside when he's walking out to see that support. I know that a couple of times when he has walked into the building, there have been people outside cheering for him as he walks in. So I'm sure part of that is just being able to show their support to more people as they drive by. And the same with people who are supporting Patrick Lyoya. People have been outside chanting, as you just heard, and really just voicing their opinion.
It's not surprising to see demonstrators out there today, as you know, today we could see a resolution in the case. So of course, supporters on both sides, not surprising that we're seeing them today.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so of course, another point that we've been talking about since things have developed since yesterday, this additional charge that was sort of added last minute, although some have said this is not uncommon that you would see in a trial like this. Of course, we went into it with prosecution going for second-degree murder charges against Christopher Schurr. at the last minute, there was another option put on the table for jurors as they started deliberations, that being that voluntary manslaughter charge. We had a chance to speak with Andrew Rodenhouse, the legal expert that's been walking us through this entire process. And, you know, he explained what's more important, more so than the differences of what those charges are the differences in the punishment. You know, he mentioned that with that second-degree murder charge, Christopher Schurr could be looking at life in prison. I think he even said the judge could sentence any number of years, hundreds of years, if the judge wanted to. Whereas with that voluntary manslaughter charge, there is a maximum of 15 years there.
And especially with that charge, with the voluntary manslaughter charge, the jury also has to figure out whether or not he acted in emotion or passion when he committed that crime, if they find him convicted. Something that Becker said that I think kind of helped people understand that is, let's say a spouse walks into their bedroom and sees their spouse in bed with someone else and point blank shoots them. That would be manslaughter because they're acting in a heat of passion, and they didn't have the mental capacity in that point to make a different decision because they were so into that passion. Something that Andrew said about manslaughter that I thought was interesting, that makes me wonder if the jury will think the same way, is that it's almost as if the voluntary manslaughter case is the middle ground, right? You have a very extreme of second-degree murder, someone spending the rest of their life in prison, versus being found innocent and them not going to prison at all. And then you kind of have this kind of middle ground where you can say, okay, he obviously killed Patrick Lyoya. You know, we can't agree that he should spend the rest of his life in prison, but some of us do think that he is convicted of something. They could say, well, we can't get together on the same idea. This kind of is a middle ground. So it'll be interesting to see if the jury thinks like that.
And if that makes the process easier or harder for them, that they now have another option to put on the table.
I think, you know, in the grand scheme of things, you've got now these 4 options, right? And the entire time, the defense and prosecution have been arguing under that second-degree murder charge. And so now not only are they having to weigh the evidence on that charge, but they're also having to weigh the evidence. We're following some altercations outside of the Kent County Courthouse. This is breaking news as we're seeing a pretty heated exchange between what appears to be Christopher Schurr demonstrators. And we're just trying to gather what's going on here.
Yeah, definitely seeing some heated words there, back and forth, some fingers in faces.
Yep.
Yeah, and we're getting word that also some of those supporters are Patrick Lyoya supporters. So obviously both sides getting into it with each other. Actually, I don't know if it almost looks like a woman is trying to like separate them, or hopefully we can get a report from a reporter out there right now. But yeah, you can kind of see people kind of getting in between those two people that were originally arguing.
And it makes you wonder, are there plans from the city to make sure there, you know, is some type of safeguard outside the courthouse? It's not surprising that this is a provocative, you know, topic that we've been discussing here for 3 years now. It's not hard to understand that emotions can get high, that we might see something like this. I just wonder what's in place to make sure things don't get out of hand out there.
And I think this really shows just how passionate both sides are about each person in this case. You know, obviously these are people that lived in our community.
Yeah.
So we don't know what connection these people have. They might be complete strangers to both Patrick and to Christopher Schurr, but there could be someone who has lived in the community with them or has, you know, some ties. So I think it looks like maybe they're dispersing just a little bit, but obviously tensions very high right now.
Yeah. Again, if you're just joining our stream, this is live outside of the Kent County Courthouse in downtown Grand Rapids, where you're seeing what appears to be a heated altercation between supporters on both sides, supporters for Christopher Schurr and supporters for Patrick Lyoya and their family. And of course, you could see, I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That is a very tense and heated exchange. And like you said, this case that we've been covering, it has brought up a lot of, you know, harsh emotions for many people on both sides, and so it's no surprise that we would see a heated exchange like this. But as far as I know, and as far as I could tell, you're looking also at, looks like Kent County deputies watching the protest below. But it is very interesting to see, and it's not surprising, but this is the first time we have really seen kind of a heated exchange in the last week.
That we've seen. Obviously there probably has been some because we have not outside the courthouse, but definitely on camera.
Yeah.
And it's important to know for people who are curious, the Kent County Sheriff's Office has been at the courthouse this whole entire process for the trials. So they're not just popping up because of this situation.
Yeah,
they
they've
probably
been
have
there,
been there
yeah.
for a while.
Yeah, I wonder what it is that what would take for them to intervene in something like that. It seems they maybe just sort of wanted to see if it could de-escalate on its own, and it
Yeah.
seems that it maybe did.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what we saw on camera. Our photographer, Jeremy, was also out there. So we have a lot of crews out there right now and also inside the courthouse. So hopefully maybe we can get some more details as to what happened with that situation.
Yeah, things we're playing out for us live just like they are for you. So just like you're waiting, we're waiting as well. We don't know when that verdict will come in. We do believe that jurors picked things back up this morning at 8:30. We know that's about what time court was getting underway every day as this trial has been happening. So, we know that jurors started that deliberation process again around 12:45 yesterday afternoon until about 5. That's when the courthouse closed. So we believe that they are back at it now, and it's just a waiting game now.
And something interesting about deliberations that Tanya said to us yesterday is you really can't tell what the jury is thinking based off anything. So actually, our reporter Erin Sullivan is out in the field right now. She's joining us. Erin, what can you tell us about that altercation?
Good morning to you all. I know the first day we've seen some tension out here between supporters, and it kind of died down during the week. But today, that's quite the different story. You can even see behind me, protesters are now mixed in with each other. Typically, we usually see Schurr supporters standing over here, as you can see, kind of towards the entrance of the courthouse. Typically, Loyola supporters were staying towards the intersection of Lyon and Ottawa, but today that's quite the different story. And this is actually the first time we're seeing them get physical with each other. We've seen people putting signs in each other's face, screaming in each other's faces, accusing people of assaulting each other. We've even seen some pushing. So this is definitely getting intense out here, just with some of the supporters that have been remaining here after Schurr walks in. Typically, we've seen a lot of off-duty Grand Rapids police officers walking over as Schurr does come into the courthouse, giving him a round of applause, and Loyola supporters standing near them, protesting, doing their chants. But today, as you can see, everyone is mixing in. Some people are filming. Some people are just standing here with their signs that say justice for Patrick Loyola. Others have their Blue Lives Matter flags, as you can see, the American flag with the blue stripe. So definitely a lot of screaming going on. I will say the sheriff's office is here, standing, watching, making sure everyone is safe right now. They've been out here all morning, making sure protesters are staying off of the grass and making sure people who are on their way to work today at this courthouse can get in safely. But like I said, this is the very first time that we're seeing people get physical. So we're hoping that does not happen again, but tensions are pretty high here. A lot of screaming, a lot of filming, and a lot very just stressed out and upset with what happened in the situation today. I don't know what you guys are looking at right now, but what I'm seeing is, again, a lot of filming, a lot of screaming. I don't know if you can hear it from where we're standing. We're trying to keep a safe distance away from all of that right now, excuse me. But yeah, this is a live look right now at the Kent County Courthouse in downtown Grand Rapids.
Erin, thanks for that. I'm glad to hear her say they're staying a safe distance away.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, we want to continue to follow this and bring everyone all the details. We definitely want our crews to stay safe.
While we watch this, let's give people a little light on how the verdict could come down. So our process, we will get that notification, 30 minutes to an hour ahead of time before the jury is to deliver that to us. And at that time, it's basically just a waiting game until they come out and deliver that verdict, which we can carry live, right?
Yes, we can. So we'll be live when that verdict is read, and obviously we will continue to follow any updates. We are hoping to hear from the prosecution and defense once that verdict is over. Some things that people should know is that there were certain court guidelines that we had to follow during the trial, but once the verdict is read, those rules basically drop and we can approach the prosecution and defense quicker than what we would be before. So we're hoping that with that process, we'll be able to talk with both sides, maybe even hopefully Patrick Lyoya's family or Christopher Schurr's family, just to kind of get a sense of how people are feeling after that verdict is read.
And that would be the only part of the trial we saw live. The closing arguments, were those also
Those were live.
Those were live.
streamed
Okay.
live for the viewers as well? So just important to point that out, that the judge did allow for certain parts of this case for you to see right along with everyone else, those closing statements. And Lauren, as you said, the verdict, we'll find out right along with everyone else and stream that for you live.
And that's just mostly because during the trial, obviously personal information can be said, you know, during a trial. Obviously, they want to keep the jurors as anonymous as possible. So if there's any time that something potentially could have happened, we would have that time to kind of redact that and keep the trial as fair as possible. But obviously, with closing arguments, you're not saying any personal information, and the verdict is just the verdict. So we'll have to see how all this plays out. And we don't know when that verdict is going to be coming out. We do have some sound from yesterday when Judge Christina Mims began her jury instructions by once again going over what Christopher Schurr is charged with and what Kent County Prosecutor Chris Becker set out to prove throughout the trial. Take a listen.
The defendant, Christopher Schurr, is charged with the crime of second-degree murder. To prove this charge, the prosecutor must prove each of the following elements beyond a reasonable doubt. First, the defendant caused the death of Patrick Lyoya. That is, that Mr. Lyoya died as a result of a gunshot wound from a gun fired by the defendant. Second, the defendant had one of these three states of mind. He intended to kill, or he intended to do great bodily harm to Mr. Lyoya, or he knowingly created a very high risk of death or great bodily harm, knowing that death or such harm would be the likely result of his actions. Third, the killing was not justified, excused, or done under circumstances that reduce it to a lesser crime. The prosecutor must also prove beyond a reasonable doubt the crime occurred on or about April 4th, 2022 in Kent County. You may also consider whether the defendant is guilty of the less serious crime of voluntary manslaughter. To prove this charge, the prosecutor must prove each of the following elements beyond a reasonable doubt. First, the defendant caused the death of Patrick Lyoya, that is, that Mr. Lyoya died as a result of a gunshot wound fired from a gun by the defendant. Second, the defendant had one of these three states of mind. He intended to kill, or he intended to do great bodily harm to Mr. Lyoya, or he knowingly created a very high risk of death or great bodily harm, knowing that death or such harm would be the likely result of his actions. Third, the defendant caused the death without lawful excuse or justification. The crime of murder may be reduced to voluntary manslaughter if the defendant acted out of passion or anger brought about by adequate cause and before the defendant had reasonable time to calm down. For manslaughter, the following two things must be present. First, when the defendant acted, his thinking must be disturbed by emotional excitement to the point that a reasonable person might have acted on impulse without thinking twice from passion instead of judgment. This emotional excitement must have been the result of something that would cause a reasonable person to act rashly or on impulse. The law does not say what things are enough to do this. That is for you to decide. Second, the killing itself must result from this emotional excitement. The defendant must have acted before a reasonable time had passed to calm down and to return to reason. The law does not say how much time is needed. That is for you to decide. The test is whether a reasonable time passed under the circumstances of this case. The defendant's intent may be proven by what he said, what he did, how he did it, or by any other facts and circumstances and evidence.
And something interesting that she was talking about when she was describing the manslaughter charge that I remember to those closing arguments is I'm sure both the prosecution and defense were prepared to kind of add that into their closing arguments.
Right.
But you could really tell they both emphasize including that charge in those closing arguments. You heard the defense really hone in on that voluntary manslaughter doesn't really apply to this situation, but then in his rebuttal, Prosecutor Becker coming right back and saying that it does apply. So it's interesting to see how quickly they were able to add in that charge into their closing arguments.
Something, you hear about all of the testimony that we've had over the last 7 days, and then hearing the first little bit of just that snippet of the jury instructions and thinking about how that's worded and like how you have to think about everything that she's saying there and then take all of that and then consider the evidence, and again, only the evidence that we heard of in court. And you have to think back to really how tough of a job this jury does have.
Yeah.
Yeah, they might have needed yesterday just to make sure they were understanding the instructions correctly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of stuff.
I think it's really interesting, though, that the jury can, in those deliberations, submit a question in writing, and if they ever have any questions about those instructions, they can ask that question at that time. But still, I mean, so much to consider.
Yeah, I mean, even just looking at all the evidence, there was, I can't even count how many sworn in testimonies we saw, plus all the evidence in terms of court documents, video, I mean, demonstrations. We saw a lot of stuff, so to have to take all of that and break it down into one verdict, that's a very tough decision they have to make.
Yeah, and is it just based off of their notes, the notes that they took during the trial? You mentioned that they can ask questions, I think maybe if they need something clarified again, but I'm going through all of my notes and I can't imagine even being prepared to go in and review all of that information.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to think about the organization too. Like, if you're hearing from that many people, you got to be very organized in your note taking to be able to recount some of those things. So, I mean, there's just a lot of nuance in this entire ending process to wrap this trial up.
I'm hoping if our producer Eric could bring up that situation outside the courthouse again. I don't know if we still have that feed, but if so, just to check in and see how things, he's going to bring it up right now. Okay. We're getting word that it did seem to kind of simmer down just a little bit. We're seeing this from a very different angle from before, but it looks like there's not as much of the altercation happening right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we could take that full, I just want to see. It does
well.
look like there are some statements still being exchanged. Say one more time, Eric. All right, apparently we're seeing the guy in the sweatshirt in the background of all of that is talking to a Grand Rapids police officer, apparently taking an incident report about whatever altercation that we just saw. And so we are still working to get the latest on that. And it's really tough to kind of, okay, we're gonna try to see if we can talk to Aaron Sullivan, who is our reporter there just outside the courthouse. And of course, we'll try and get some more info on what exactly transpired there.
Ticket or someone's being reported for potential assault. Like you saw during our last live shot, both of the groups kind of came together. Tensions got high. People were kind of pushing each other's signs and pushing each other's hats, but we're not exactly sure, like you said, what exactly is going on with that conversation happening right now. But it is this gentleman over here in the sweatshirt was talking to one of the officers here, talking about what occurred earlier. So we're definitely going to be asking more questions once that kind of simmers down over there, but it just seems like they're trying to regroup, figure out what exactly is going on. But it appears this man did go to the police. It appears that the Schurr supporters here that were in the mix with him are kind of keeping their distance right now. But like I said, we're going to be asking more questions, see what exactly is happening once this kind of dies down.
All right, yeah, stay safe, Aaron, because I know you're now very close to the demonstrators. But again, thank you for that report on exactly what is going on down there.
Yeah, definitely. So as people can remind you all that there are no court proceedings right now. Usually around this time, if we were lucky, we'd be able to toss you some court proceedings. But again, the jury is in deliberation, so we will not be tossing to anything. We'll be sitting and waiting for the jury to come out with the decision. Before we wrap, I just wanted to ask final thoughts. Emily, Tanner, what are you kind of thinking right now?
Oh, I'm just so curious to see if that verdict will come today. I mean, you think about it until 5 o'clock this evening, it's like, okay, they've got plenty of time. I don't see why not. But then you think about the magnitude of the job, on their hands, on their shoulders right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if we do go beyond today.
Yeah.
I just think, boy, what a job that jury has. I would not want to be the 12 jurors in the Kent County Courthouse right now. Again, weighing all that evidence and then weighing those instructions and then tacking on that other charge that can be considered in all of this. I mean, they've just got a really, really tough job. And back before the trial started, we were speaking with Andrew Rodenhouse. He was telling us he gets emotional thinking about the weight and the job of a jury, because these are a group of your peers judging basically your fate in this trial. And he said that's one of the most patriotic things that somebody can do if you're a jury member. So I just really think that they've got a tough job. And again, I would not be surprised. You called it last week, Wednesday. You thought Wednesday we would have this all wrapped up. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it go into Wednesday either.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with both of your all sentiments. And I just wanted to just update for those who may be wondering, our crews down there do have security. So we are not just sending our crews out willy-nilly. They are there protected right now. And obviously we have protocols put in place to where if things do get more rowdy, we will retrieve them back to a more safe area. We're gonna be concluding our stream this morning. And as we await a verdict, it could take the jury hours or even days to deliver a verdict in this case. But we will be ready with crews both inside and outside the courthouse the moment the verdict is being read. You can hear the verdict live on 13 Plus and watch our coverage from all 6 days of the trial so far, as well as an episode of The Docket with Callie Lichter, which takes you through the entire timeline of events ahead of the trial. All of that and more is right now on 13 Plus.